We're live. Michael, you've really improved our names.
Have it? Yeah, you like the bubbles?
They're purple. The bubbles are nice. Yeah. All right. Good. I'm very happy now to look out there and say, my name is Steve Jaguar.
And I'm Mike Foster.
And welcome once again to... I swear one of these days I'm going to play that guitar thing live. You're going to come back to me and I'm going to have all the kit out and I'm just going to be rocking, man.
That'd be sweet. I'll pay.
Yeah, maybe when we're a little bit more established though. Awesome. Thank you. Welcome to the show. And this is the show where we talk about all things Kubernetes, security, cloud native, and anything that makes us say, what the, throughout the week.
Yeah, you got it. And if you like what we talk about, if you're on Twitter or Twitch, hit the bell, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, we come every Friday. We also have meetups every month where we have two or three speakers that come in and talk about the CNCF ecosystem, security threats, supply chain stuff. So follow along. Come check us out. Give us some topics too if you want us to hit on them. We'd love to hear from you. Got a packed show for today, actually. Some big news in the Kubernetes ecosystem that I feel like I wanted to kick off with.
We're going to go straight in?
Yeah, I'm going straight in for it. Pod security policies are officially deprecated.
Is it official?
It is official. I'm going to make it official. Yeah, you can do that. But there's also for the viewers.
You're going to pop it in the chat?
It's in the chat, but there is the official GitHub issue that is being... It was actually the default going to be deprecated because it had been in beta for so long, and they just said 1.2.1 they're going to deprecate it, and it's going to be removed in 1.2.5 or 1.2.5.
So heads up, people who have done the CKS.
Yeah, there's so many questions on that of like what is going on with PSPs. So yeah, it's been an interesting month with that one, but
it is fantastic, and we can discuss where you think it's going. And this is why you stuck this doc on our agenda. The future of pod security policy.
Yeah, Tim Altclair, he's the head of SIGAuth for Kubernetes and did a real good job in this documentation, and you can go and comment on it as well. I'll drop it in the chat. And good evening, DSO Training, DevSec 0802, hola. Yeah, it's a great doc. It actually outlines their thought process as to what they want to do with PSPs and some of the limitations that it has. So check it out. And I recommend, if you have any thoughts, throw them in the chat. But from my point of view, I think the limitations in what they said are actually, it makes sense, right? There's rollout challenges. There's issue with auto-injected sidecars. There is the issue of PSPs failing closed. So if there's no default PSP in the cluster, it fails everything automatically. And otherwise, like you basically have, when you implement PSPs, it's pretty much wide open anyways. So it requires knowledge base for people to actually implement them. Now, they recommend a couple options for how they want to move forward. So
just popping down there then.
Yeah, there's the fixed PSP method, which PSP is a cluster resource that gets applied to the namespaces using RBAC, right? And maybe we move towards more of a namespace PSP. So it's PSP per namespace sort of thing. That doesn't really address some of the other issues like sidecar injections or CI/CD, like vetting and stuff like that, right? Then there's the other one, which is like minimalist starter policies. So like you always have a default PSP, you kind of have these default ones that you can apply at cluster startup. And one of the cons of this is like it doesn't, again, address sidecar issues. And there's always going to be this negotiation of like what the default should be. Are people actually going to find it effective, right? So stuck there too.
This is where they call out OPA and Gatekeeper for advanced users as well.
Yeah, and really that's, I think, what leads into option 3, which is third-party controllers, right, as an enforcement mechanism. So you don't have a built-in pod security enforcement mechanism. You default to the controllers for enforcement, right? Security contexts aren't going away. So security contexts enforced at the deployment and pod level are still gonna be there, right? It's just how we scale and apply broad policies to cluster-wide resources, right?
So they're going to be going with a model which is a little bit more like, let's say, the CNI, where you're like, we're enabling something to come in here as a third party to make it happen.
Yes, exactly. What I found interesting though was option 3B here with the SIG auth endorsed choice. So they just keep security context, but then it's like you said, exactly like a CNI, where we have, if it's OPA or something like that, that's coming in for an enforcement mechanism. And they're just going to basically say, yes, this is the solution that we want to go with, which I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. We move away from basically saying Docker is kind of the container runtime, and now we have all these container runtimes, and now we're moving into, there's one security policy enforcement, and then there's probably going to be other security policy enforcements, right? Like there's this weird sort of back and forth that I think is happening. I don't know, maybe it's just the maturity of the ecosystem that needs to move into more security-focused tools. But
well, so what do you think about OPA or OPA, depending how you want to say it, as the replacement solution, or the one that most people seem to be adopting?
It has its good and bad. It requires a lot of Kubernetes knowledge. Most of the people that I think are adopting OPA or OPA have been with Kubernetes for the last 4 years. They've operationalized it. They understand policy enforcement, and they've gotten to the point where they're actually using Kubernetes and, in scaling, right? If you're going to push something like OPA on, let's say, an organization that's new to Kubernetes, and that's the only policy enforcement that you really have, I think that's a real just failure launch sort of situation where you're trying to operationalize Kubernetes, and then now I need to go learn Rego, and I need to go learn OPA and mutating and admission webhooks and all this stuff, instead of just learning about containers and operationalizing a single app. Now I need to learn about this whole ecosystem, and I think it just made the ecosystem a little more complicated for people breaking in if you're trying to adopt OPA.
For the DevSecOps enthusiasts, it's security with programming.
Yeah.
Hooray, that's always worked. That's, I think, my I don't know, my reticence or reluctance to fully endorse it, because I get that from our perspective, I think the language is cool, but ultimately it's going to have to be learned. It's like we were in a conversation where we were talking about CK versus CKS. And if I am a security specialist for Kubernetes, do I have to understand in depth Kubernetes from an administrator perspective? And actually, you do, particularly if we're going to start talking about creating policy as code to that depth. So it's a challenge.
Yeah, I don't see an easy way out for them. I still think they should have at least supported a basic policy and at least left it there until something else comes along. But I think what I don't really like is you're going to see a situation where you're going to have all these cloud providers, they're going to say it might be OPA or whatever CNCF tool they're using, but then all the cloud providers are basically going to rip OPA, turn it into their own thing. And you're going to have different policy enforcement mechanisms for the different providers, right?
Yeah.
So instead of actually keeping the community together, I think that you've sort of dispersed it, which, I mean, it has its benefits too, but we'll see.
Wait 5 years. We'll find out what happened.
Yeah. And we touched on some pretty good anti-patterns, if you want to this discussion.
Look at that
stuff.
So this was an article that I discovered from CodeFresh, specifically Kostas Kapolonis, who wrote it. It's in 3 parts. There's like an ebook associated, but it's not that hard to just go through all 3. Kubernetes deployment anti-patterns. And so this is what I was reading at 3 a.m. last night while I was digesting the difficulties associated with eating too much pizza. And he does also, worth calling out, he has a 10 Docker anti-patterns, which we won't get into. But I'm going to see if I can get the whole list on the screen. And I can't. There we go. Here's the list of bad practices that he will examine in 3 parts. So it's not more than 15. It's actually 5, I think, per part. And I thought this was really good. And it's in the chat, so go check it out. I thought it was awesome because the one that blew my mind a little bit was, and we were talking about this beforehand, was using kubectl as a debugging tool was bad. And of course, as a serial tinkerer, I just thought, what are you talking about? I use it all the time. And if you look at the way he describes it, he's like got example commands, and I'm thinking, yes, that's exactly what I do. That's how else would I debug this? But essentially, he was promoting having proper monitoring. Really, he actually even plugs a tool that given we talked about dashboards last week, he plugged yet another dashboard for monitoring called Kubvius, which I thought you can read the doc and find that yourself because I haven't even looked at it yet. But I thought, all right, I get it. Among others, a favorite of yours, Michael, was
the developer workflow one.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why Docker Desktop is still really popular, right? And just not baking anything into your images. Your developers should be able to run your application on Docker Desktop as is, right? And be able to test it in their local environment. That's the whole point of containers and allowing that workflow. And then all your configuration and all those other files are also in sort of a separate repo that when the image gets pushed up, then all of the configuration is then attached to it, right? The application, the container should not even know that it's being run in Kubernetes. And that's almost where you want to be, especially. And this is sort of an anti-Kubernetes thing. But if you want to go serverless, if you want to be portable, if you want to be able to pick up your application and move it to a different, Kubernetes service, like from AWS to GCP or to GKE, that's where you want to be when you're creating your containers. So it's really hard to do that because when people start off, they basically turn their developers into Kubernetes experts, and the developers want to put everything in their Docker file. It also makes it harder to test, harder to configure. You have hard coded any of your changes versus like applying a config map or something like that. And it also leads into one of the other anti-patterns here, which is pulling information into the container and not pushing, right? Like I said before, containers should be unaware that it's in Kubernetes. So if you're using something like Vault or Artifactory or something like that, the container should start up, and then you should have some sort of auto injection or some sort of service that's pushing the information into the container that you are actually specifying, right? That way, we keep our containers somewhat immutable as much as possible.
Yeah, he touches on that in several of the anti-patterns that he's got here. That the theme of decoupling, and the one that caught my eye was the one where he talked about mixing application deployment with infrastructure. I think that's number 4. Having Terraform deployed apps using the Helm provider, and it's one of those things that, as like having worked for a lot of vendors, and vendors sell applications, right? And they say, "Oh, do you have a Terraform? Can I use Terraform for this?" And I've always been scratching my head thinking, well, how do I say that that's a bad practice to do that? Because generally, you're making changes to applications, and I realize in some cases, the application you might consider to be part of your infrastructure. It's a one-shot, stick it in there. But even then, if you look at something like, well, I can use StackRox as an example. The release cycle for StackRox that changes what it does is going to change far more often than your infrastructure. So to couple all that together, it means changes are going to take significantly longer to make something small. So to the extent that you won't change it, and you would fall behind in something like a security tool. So there's a really good example in there where he's talking about decoupling those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if you're not working in containers, that's process is still useful, right? I mean, I used to work. Yeah, you do use like Terraform, and then maybe you use Ansible afterwards to like configure anything inside, right? And then you can make those slight changes if you didn't want to be fully declarative. But yeah, if you're just using Terraform to bring everything up, then also you are completely reliant on that state file, right? So even if I'm creating a cluster, like if I'm using like Rancher or OpenShift or something like that, it's, you use Terraform to create the VMs, and then you use basically your command lines to configure the cluster on top, and then you install your application. So you can use something like a makefile. So it's like checks, at the start, you use like a makefile. So it's like infrastructure, Kubernetes application, and then you can start breaking them off into separate things that you can evolve over time, right?
Yeah, and that's another one of those things that it comes from bad habits you generate as a closet tinkerer, because you have a tendency to just go, I'll just go blat and put it all up there, and then destroy and rebuild. But actually, at a larger scale, that becomes very troublesome.
Mm-hmm. And I mean,
I was going
to say that at the beginning, when people adopt Kubernetes, it really is closet tinkering, right? Like I've seen organizations where you have a lead and they're like, we want to do Kubernetes, and business goes, okay, like we'll give you 3 months. Right? Like, I've seen those scenarios. So yeah, it's just when you start with that core, and when you avoid those patterns at the beginning, it just makes that transition so much easier as you scale, right?
He's got a few other obvious ones there, like misunderstanding just what Kubernetes networking is, but then some nice ones that are easily automated, like memory and CPU limits, health probes, etc. Like just some standard bad practices that you can get tools to do, like Kublender, for example. You can use it to just eliminate half these out of the box and then start working on your bad habits.
Yeah, I mean, things like Kublender, at least just to give you visibility, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's like, hey, maybe you need to set some CPU requirements, right?
Yeah. Cool. So we go on to the next. Oh, we're on the next section of the show, even.
Yeah, that's great.
All right, hold on. It's only a small one, but it is still a.
Yes. So I have a really good resource that I stumbled across that I wanted to share with you guys, and it's about COVID-19 cyber attacks. So
let me drop that in.
I thought the funniest when I dropped it in the chat. Actually, no, we got it twice. But the first thread here on is it December 5th? I think business underestimates COVID-19 cybersecurity risks. Half of business leaders don't think there's an increase in attacks due to COVID-19. Also, this attitude is spilling over into security training for remote employees.
Yeah. And this is why half is a popular number.
Yeah, I feel like it's a 50-50 society nowadays almost, right?
Yeah. Half people voted for the other guy in the election. Half the people voted us out of Europe.
Yeah, there's I just think it's really interesting, especially since organizations have basically been handing laptops to people to go home with, to then like VPN into their into work, and they're just like, yeah, no more security issues. And the thing too with cybersecurity risks is it's not that there might be more malicious hackers, but now I have a work laptop that I used to have to use at work. Now I'm at home. Now I have my kids. Now I have people coming in the house. Cybersecurity issues are not just, some malicious person on the other end. It's, grandma putting 1, 2, 3 as her password, right? So
in that example, it's even worse when companies don't have the laptops to provision and they enable people's home laptops.
Yes.
Or they just go happy, go clicky, and they become the phishing buddy for the entire network. So it is everything's gone up, I think, generally. But yeah, that's funny. Some good bedtime reading there.
Yeah, there's a bunch of good content there if you're looking to read more about some threats that have happened. And obviously, we have hackers taking advantage of people looking for information on COVID-19 and sending phishing scams and things like that. But I have, I don't know, just a general thing that I've noticed, but I've had people message me saying that some of the scams are actually becoming really quite sophisticated. Like, how you get some email and it doesn't really make sense. It's like the scam knows exactly everything about you. And I think as part of like the social media phase nowadays, it's pretty easy to find out a lot and really tailor those scams. So,
well, I mean, just getting specific to the UK, our NHS track and trace system has been somewhat poorly secured. So it's just gathering information about everywhere you go, and then that information is being passed within departments as a spreadsheet. Like that's maybe secure at rest, secure at transit, or not secure at all. Either way. So if you could combine that data with the fact that we've just started vaccinating, people would be very interested in a phishing campaign that said, click here to schedule your vaccination. In fact, you don't even need to have a list. Everyone might click that one. Anyway, interesting. On the back of that, Google blocks 18 million malware and phishing emails a day. So it's happening.
That is crazy.
Yeah, I guess I'll say it. Thanks, Google.
Yeah, doing good things.
Yeah, very much so. All right. What's next in the list? That's the only WTF we have.
That's great news. I think that's all we can
Other
find at
than
least.
that's all the only technical one. I mean, there's obviously the whatever it is, the bizarre inauguration, but as neither of us are American, we can let that go.
Yeah, the Canadian takeover. Watch out for it, 2021.
All right. Okay, so now we're going to geek out about Twitter, social media.
Yeah,
Yes?
I came across this. I thought it was really interesting. There's some really good call outs here. I'll post it in the chat as well for people to follow along. Just some great accounts if you're on Twitter. And they cover just basically all different areas of cybersecurity, not Kubernetes specific. There's a couple down towards the bottom that are, doing AI. And I just thought it was really a good resource for people. If they're on Twitter, if you want to avoid Twitter, I don't blame you, hit or miss. But yeah, just wanted to give a shout out so that people have the extra resource.
And, well, I think the most important thing we can learn from this, if I just pop that back, is it's really 23, isn't it? 21 there, but there's two more.
Yeah,
there you go. And then just one, just there as well. So yeah, 23 Twitter people you really should be following. I went through the list and I was not following all of them. So I have corrected this error and I will be now informed. Amazing. I like how this article actually shows what their latest tweet is. That's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. One of them is about SolarWinds. What a surprise.
Yeah, we're moving on to that soon.
Our next one is incredibly self-serving, isn't it? It's I think we announced in the first show that the StackRox acquisition by Red Hat, which is a big deal, sending ripples throughout the cybersecurity and Kubernetes security industry. And we released our article and we thought, all right, we're going to see what happens. But what I didn't expect was how many opinion pieces would come out about it. And the one I think, there's a few. I mean, the one that caught our eye or my eye was and actually, I really like this author. If you can find him and follow him, he writes a lot of really good stuff. Nevertheless, I'm not going to get into it, but I'm just amazed. Maybe because it's almost like, you ever do this? This is a stupid analogy, but I'm going to do it. You ever buy a car and say you buy, I don't know, Honda Civic or some car, whatever, right? You've never owned one before. To your mind, you've never noticed a Honda Civic on the road in your life. But now you own one and you see every single one.
Oh yeah.
That's what it's like. I don't think
confirmation bias.
Confirmation bias. I don't think I've ever noticed how many opinion articles that happen off the back of an acquisition until I'm involved in one. And now it's like, what is everybody writing about this? But anyway, there you go. Did you read any of these and have any opinions, or did you just go, yeah, whatever?
Yeah, I read a bunch. Like you said, there is quite a few. Didn't see anything too negative, but I think the opinion piece is more touched on the general broad sort of, let's say, concept coming out of 2020, which was security, and especially educational content around security, because a lot of these, just big organizations don't know how to secure Kubernetes clusters, and especially with supply chain coming in there, all these, because we've decentralized all these applications now there's like a new need for something to honestly centralize all these applications again. So I thought it was interesting. Yeah, I know. Like, we shifted to cloud and now we're hybrid cloud, we shift back. It's becoming an ecosystem where you have all this flexibility, right?
It's all about on-premise. That's what we're going to go for. 2025. The cloud's dead.
The cloud's dead.
The cloud's dead. All right. So there we go. A little bit of self-indulgent chit chat about the acquisition. And from here, we're going to go forward into either our last or our second last. I'm not too sure, depending on timing, right? We're at 24 minutes now. I think we can do this in 5 and then have some bits on the end. This is SolarWinds again. We were a little bit of foreshadowing earlier. We were talking about it, but this is pretty good. It was specific, and it was an article that was released by CrowdStrike, and not just any old. Is the author even named? Because I'm not going to name it if it's not there. Who doesn't put the author on their articles? Michael Foster. That's not good. Okay, well, anyway, friend of a friend. I know who the author is, and he's a super genius research R&D guy for CrowdStrike, and we'll stick it into the chat in a moment. But essentially, it breaks down how it happened with the two different key parts of malware that were involved. There's almost too much detail if you're not super geeky about how it happened. But if you understand the build hijacking step, that's where it gets really interesting, because it talks about how they got their initial malware in there and how that malware, which I think somebody even called it non-malicious malware. Of course, it's malicious malware. It's monitoring the MS build process and waiting for the piece that they had pre-built with their own other, which was their own other malware, which had their backdoor in it. And as it got to that part of linking that in, they swapped it out and put their own piece in. And of course, the build continues on. And the lengths, what's really interesting to me in here is the lengths they went through to prevent the build breaking because of their change in piece. Like, it always had to work. And they had all sorts of checks and balances around making sure that they didn't run out of memory. They thought of everything to make sure that it never broke and someone didn't have to take a good hard look at the logs.
Yeah, because they would be able to see it if anything broke and it tripped the flag or anything like that, they'd notice.
Yeah. That was one of the most fantastic. I think when you say, oh, they got in and they were replacing a piece, but not just that. It's almost like they ran it through simulation in advance and found every possible way that it could have gone wrong to make sure they ran undetected for as long as possible.
Inside job.
Yeah, that would be cool. It was amazing. So that is what got us thinking, like, okay, so this is a proper software supply chain attack. Like, not they had an image in Docker Hub that they squatted on a name or something, or they did a Terraform template typo squat or something. Like, it wasn't something like that. This is like advanced persistent threat.
This was targeted.
This was targeted. And I think we saw that Malwarebytes is now reporting a similar attack, right? I'm not going to get into that though. But what's interesting is that one of the most overlooked pieces of software in the CNCF landscape is, let me just bring it up, is In-toto. The framework to secure the integrity of software supply chains. And had a really good podcast conversation with Michael Hasenblast last year about In-toto. He was adamant about its usefulness. And what's, I guess, good for In-toto, bad for the world is good for In-toto, is that it is specifically designed for this kind of scenario. And I was going to, let me just pop over to its GitHub. In its GitHub, they have a demo. And it's real, I'll be blunt, it's pretty boring to just do it live on the command line. And so I was going to do that, and so I didn't. And then I went looking for someone else's demo, being totally honest, thinking I could just steal it if they did something more entertaining. And it seems like everybody out there glosses over the demo and just talks about it. So I will just talk about it. But for getting the download, the idea behind this demo is it gives you a mock software supply chain with different pieces of the puzzle. It shows you how to create a layout using a layout file that gives everybody involved in the ecosystem a private key so that they can sign all of their actions. And then In-toto essentially becomes a bit of a wrapper, and you can see it here, if that's even readable, wraps around Git in a way and starts to provide hashes and tracking for every action that happens, such that you know what it is. So if you can imagine, if you're tracking and recording every action, when you start to build, you can then check to make sure all of the components that were used in that, let's say someone hasn't watched your MS build and injected their own thingy where it's not been signed by your own private key, you can detect these things, and SolarWinds would have never happened. So that is, I just found that the whole thing really interesting. You can go check out the demo, run it yourself, and you'll see that it's really good. I think the con of it generally, that having looked at it, was I had no idea how I would implement that, like at any level of scale.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And it's like, let's say there is something that trips. Can you enforce it at runtime? Like, is there a database? Is there something you can like reference back to say, I can follow it through, right? That's
funny you should say that. Well, you pointed this one out to me.
Oh, yeah.
The Recore, which is one I'd never heard of. You heard it on a meeting? Was it a SIG security meeting?
Yeah, so I was on SIG security, and they did a demo for Recore. I found it really interesting. It's slightly pushed and contributed to by Red Hat and Google, and there's a couple other contributors that are basically in school and college right now that are helping out too. But it's cryptographic image signing, but builds an immutable database that you can then reference back to make sure that anything that's being executed has actually been signed. And I thought it was interesting, especially because Red Hat and Google were participating in it, that with Google's like artifact repository and things like that, and binary authorization, you could get to the point where every single image has been cryptographically signed, reference that database in the cluster, in a Kubernetes cluster, and then be able to view anything that hasn't been signed is not allowed in, right? So, and then the other thing too is any changes. So any container that spins up, we check the signature. Is it valid in the database? Nope. All right, you're done. So enforcing that at runtime, I think, is the next step after we have some sort of immutable key, so to speak.
Yeah. And just for those who are keen on this kind of thing, it's written in Go. It is a CNCF project, is it?
No,
you were talking.
It's not.
It's not yet.
Okay. Yeah, right. It's they just demoed it. I don't want to talk too much for them and get ahead of my skis here. There is the recording if you want to get into the CNCF security. They posted the recording of the demo, but
right.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the plan is with it.
It's new anyway. There's only 23 stars on it. It's only 4 forks. Like, it looks super fresh. So worth taking a look at if you're keen on maybe being a part of a new security project. So, and
there is a security supply chain for Kubernetes now, if you're looking to get more into it.
Awesome. So I'll bring us back. So we just hit exactly 30 minutes. We have a few items we could get into that are super quick. Do you want to do them?
I'll just intro them, but I wanted to take a look at sealed secrets next week. So without getting too much into it, taking a look at sealed secrets, staying on supply chain, I wanted to introduce Voucher and go into it a little bit. It was Shopify's project that they released. So looking into checking those out and staying on that supply chain theme that we got going on, weirdly enough.
Okay, that sounds cool. So there's the intro. We'll next week tune in to talk about sealed secrets and Voucher from Shopify, which is a fork from Grapheus Voucher. So supply chain, maybe there we go.
We'll focus GitOps security, cryptographic image signing. We got that stuff coming up for you.
All right, amazing. So we'll sign off right there. Thanks everybody for watching. How many do we have? We had 5, I think, or 6 at our peak this time. We're getting one or two extra every time. Thanks for watching. Anything you want to plug? Are you doing anything next week that is before the next show?
I'm doing like a Rancher masterclass. So looking at RKE, Kubelinter, StackRox, whole kind of declarative security thing on Tuesday, if you are interested. Other than that, I kind of want to see some more WTF subjects if anybody runs across them.
More crazy.
Yeah, I need some highlights in my life.
If you do find one, community@StackRox.com is the place to send them, or you can tweet us directly, and we should get it because we generally pay attention to our Twitters. And Ask Alice says thank you. So thank you, Ask Alice, and everybody who's been watching. My name's Steve Jaguar.
And I'm Mike Foster.
All right. This has been another episode of